We are 3 continents together today for love of our planet. I'm so much honored to be together again with dear Professor Guy McPherson, his partner, loving Pauline, helping everything to make these things happen. Thank you so much, Pauline, for your loving work, for your service to planet, for everyone. And we are together with Kevin Hester from New Zealand. Hello. So lovely to see you. And Willem Kalpes from Mississippi State University from United States again. And me from the Netherlands, you know. Let's start. I will start with a small joke maybe. Dear Guy McPherson, you've been doing some sessions like letters from your audience, and you read some letters and you answer their letters, and each time when you read their letters you call them Bill. Bill wrote this Bill. Every time they are named Bill, to not give their actual name, but Bill is standing for William, right?
Yes.
And so I did a big work and phoned William for you. That's all the years.
So we share a name, William.
Those emails.
William, we share a name, which I only discovered a few years ago. Guy is the American pronunciation.
Oh, Guy.
Guy is short for Guillaume, which is the French spelling of William.
Good heavens. Yeah, just like in Italy, they call me Guglielmo.
So you can call me Bill. And that's why I refer to everybody else as Bill, unless they're a public figure.
2 Bills, what can go wrong?
That's great.
We made a cheerful start, hopefully, but our topic is not super cheerful today, unfortunately. We are trying to give loving words to everyone and trying to share our positive energy, but on the other hand, we are all heartbroken with a war going on in Europe. And there's so much suffering, and we are already dealing with climate change, and we should be putting our attention on what immediately needs to be done, but it seems like we are doing things even more violent. Dear Guy McPherson, is it something expected for you? Did you expect, just in the middle of the climate crisis, also a war coming?
Well, it certainly doesn't surprise me, and also given that we are well past the peak of conventional oil extraction. So that happened in 2005 or 2006, according to the International Energy Agency and the United States Energy Information Administration, either 2005 or 2006. And the Hirsch report, which came out in 2005, of course, we can only know about the peak in retrospect. So the Hirsch report came out in 2005, prepared for the United States government. And in it, Hirsch said, we need to have 20 years notice before the peak in order to make appropriate changes to our society so that we can survive without a broad scale collapse. And then he went on to write that maybe, just maybe, we could get by with only 10 years advance notice if we really throw everything we have at it, if the government takes it very seriously, and corporations, and basically all of us change our lives. Well, that was more than 17 years ago. And so we're at that point in the relationships between countries that it's a zero-sum game. Oil is the master material. If we don't have oil, we can't dig for coal. If we don't have oil, we can't build the structure we want to build. If we don't have oil, we can't mine rare earths that are used to make solar panels and wind turbines, and so on. So the list goes on. It doesn't surprise me at all that the United States is leading the way in military misadventures, in attempts to increase access to oil. that this is all happening at the same time we're in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change just adds to the catastrophe. It's stunning. It shouldn't surprise any of us, yet I'm surprised every day. I'm particularly surprised by the email messages I get every day. I got one yesterday, I got one today, indicating that people are not going to follow me anymore because I'm such a bummer. Well, I don't know if you noticed, but I've been such a bummer for a really long time. It's not like this is new for me.
Which is why I follow you.
So yes, we're living in the age of catastrophe. And personally, I'm shocked we made it this far. The annual reviews are among the most conservative of peer-reviewed literature, and it was the 2012 issue of the annual review of Earth and Planetary Sciences, in which Maslowski and three colleagues projected an ice-free Arctic Ocean in 2016, plus or minus 3 years. And here we are, years after that 2016 projection, years after, a couple or 3 years after the plus or minus 3, 2019. So we made it this far. It looks like, based on the 6-month ensemble forecast from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, it looks like that we will have another ice-covered Arctic Ocean again in September of this year. So I'm not a bummer all the time. Good news just follows me around.
What about you, dear Kevin, William, and Pauline? Did you find this unexpected, or did you assume a war could happen just in the middle of the climate crisis?
Absolutely not unexpected. The wars are all about resources. And whether you're having a proxy war, as the US is doing in this situation, or you're actually invading a country, as Russia has done, it's about resources. And, you know that old saying about location, location, location when you're buying a home? Well, in this case, it's resources, resources, resources. It always has been. It has never been about social justice. That's not what wars are about. We can pretend and say, oh, we're here to, free the Iraqis. We're here to bring democracy. That's BS. It's about what is under the surface of that soil. And that's always been the case since Roman times, since before Rome, forever. So I'm not surprised.
And I might also say, what the other Bill was saying, and what you're saying, Pauline, too. I'm a big fan of Alfred McCoy. He had an interesting podcast interview not too long ago in a Global Governance Forum. And, he talks about the Thucydides trap also, and another great Greek. But, the tragedy is when we see a collapse of world order and empire, typically they're the ones who are put in this position of a use it or lose it mentality. The only thing that surprises me about this World War III that we're in now is how, well, I was looking at Eastern Europe, and of course I was looking at Central Asia, because it's like a fault line where these two plates crash. I mean, and historically that's always been a huge fault line, all the way into, Japan. I thought it would heat up first in China, but yeah, it's the biblical four horsemen and resources. Whether we read Thomas Hobbes, and the social contract, or Sun Tzu, The Art of War, it's always the same story. Yeah, an aggressor nation, especially when it's beginning to contract and collapse, will behave aggressively. And we are, although I'm no Putin fanboy, but NATO is doing everything to really accelerate the situation, as I thought they would, but I initially thought it would start off in China, but of course, yeah.
Pauline
Even
wrote
you are the
something.
remotest. Sorry, Guy McPherson.
Pauline wrote something to that effect on social media, and she was immediately called the Putin apologist.
I lived in Germany when the wall fell down. I was in Berlin 1 week before East Germany collapsed. There were some small protests on the street, but zero indication that the entire country could collapse. That happened, and then not long thereafter, the Soviet Union collapsed. There was a domino effect straight away. The NATO and the Warsaw Pact had negotiations at that time to determine what the new relationship between them all would be. And the NATO countries agreed that they wouldn't expand 1 inch east. Since that time, 13 of the previous Soviet states have joined NATO, and Russia is being surrounded by their bases. The Bay of Pigs and the invasion in Cuba and the Cuban Missile Crisis were all about the same things that are happening now, somewhat different context, but still linked. The Americans didn't want nuclear weapons on their borders, and it nearly came to a war with Russia. That got resolved by Russia taking the weapons back. Now, NATO is stalking Russia on all fronts, and now we have war. And because I honestly think this will escalate to a full-on shooting war between Russia and the NATO countries, which are basically the United States, because of the pathology of the people who are in control of the military-industrial complex. And by dint of that, they're in control of NATO. I just don't see how there's any way back from a full-on shooting war, especially when you consider that every day now, all the NATO countries and New Zealand on the other side of the world are resupplying Ukraine. They're sending weapons to bomb Russia. That's a precursor to a full-on military conflict.
We sent them $33 billion worth of military hardware, and that's only the beginning. Yeah.
And who gets hurt? Just the Ukrainians and Russian soldiers. That's directly getting hurt. But of course, everybody else who gets hurt are the people who could have used those $33 billion in healthcare or housing or medicine. I said that already, healthcare. I got nothing. I'm done.
NATO will fight Russia to the very last Ukrainian.
They're all collateral damage.
My mother has, she was born in the Polish corridor, and so, everybody hated her. She was part Jewish, part Russian. Some of her relatives fled to Shtetl from the area around Belarus. So, yeah, I had that kind of Eastern European, just all the stories I remember my mother was saying. But, I knew a lot about Russian history as a kid, just her perspective, and she also has German. And I think another thing too, when we look at the historical diachronic forces that are so tectonic, is that, Americans just have no conception of how the slaughter, the wholesale slaughter that has occurred in that country, going all the way back to Genghis Khan, Ivan the Terrible. They see, there's almost no way to wrap your head around it as an American. It would be like, I guess the best analogy I could think of is if I'm living in the United States and I see Mexico run by ISIS with nuclear weapons, and they see Ukraine as a backdoor, and with good reason. You look at Operation Barbarossa when the Nazis nearly, conquered all of Russia, and their country has been, the numbers are just unfathomable. It's like in the Warring States period in China, where is it any wonder that they're so paranoid, and why any kind of act of aggression from NATO is seen as an existential threat? Their whole escalate to de-escalate strategy.
I might take issue with the term paranoid, because that assumes that there's a false fear.
Right, no, yeah.
They've been
Yeah.
hounded at their borders
Yeah.
since the end of World War II. The US and NATO have funded paramilitary and terrorist groups in all the countries that surround Russia as far as they can. We created the Taliban
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
to harry Russia. I mean, it's just, I feel like it's so disingenuous when we could be working with them to develop science and medicine and technology that would not destroy the planet. Instead,
Or even just something like feed the Afghanis right now, about 30
Right.
million of them are starving. And
Yeah.
sorry, you're right. There's a fine line between, as I always said since I was a teenager, there's a fine line between paranoia and hypervigilance.
right.
Dear Guy
Yeah.
and Pauline, you say this is a resource war, and I believe that it's right, but there's a paradox that I find it difficult to understand, and many people do so, I think. One thing is, in Europe, our main food resource was Ukraine, and now we've got food crisis. Our food shelves are empty. And also the farms are all destroyed. Farmers are destroyed. And if it's a resource war, resource is gone. There's no resource anymore. And secondly, the second paradox is Europe says now, okay, we don't want Russia to send us gas. We don't want this and that. We turn everything to new energy system. We put solar panels, windmills, nuclear, or whatever. But these things also require resources to put there. And how do you explain this paradox? We assume that we are solving a resource crisis, but we make it even worse.
The big resource in Ukraine is the natural gas pipeline. That's a big one. And the ports. Having ports is, well, besides the drink itself, which is amazing, but having a port for your ships to ship the natural gas and that sort of thing. Food, if our nation's leaders looked at food as an actual resource, it would actually have been addressed. They would have taken care of that we wouldn't have let Russia invade Ukraine. Now, Russia is a huge supplier of wheat and grain.
Right.
They're the breadbasket of that part of the world.
Yeah, we will eat gas and drink petrol then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in last interview with Guy McPherson, with you, Pauline, you told me that probably right now in Chernobyl, the engineers are exhausted to keep the nuclear power plant safe. And the day after our interview, I sent you the link. There was a news article that they are exhausted. They say they cannot keep working there in terrible conditions. They need food, water, and they don't have any sleep. And how long this can continue this way, you think?
So it can't? We don't know.
Where are we heading?
New. Kevin, what were you gonna?
Would you like to tell more, dear Guy McPherson? Yes.
I just came across this a few days ago. It's in Scientific American. It was published November 30th, 2021. So what's that, 5 months and 10 days ago. And it's by Henry G. or Gee. I'm not sure how he pronounces his last name.
Oh, yeah.
G-E-E. He's a paleontologist, evolutionary biologist, and an editor at Nature. This is one of the more renowned series of peer-reviewed publications. His latest book is a very, with very in parentheses, a very short history of life on Earth. It was published last year. And he makes a good case in here that humans are going to go extinct, and very soon. The bottom line, the final paragraph, the final sentence, he refers to somebody else. To paraphrase Lehrer, if we are going to write about human extinction, we better start writing now. So he's a paleontologist, evolutionary biologist, and he's obviously well informed because he's an editor for Nature. And he thinks we're right on the cusp of going extinct for a variety of reasons. So that'll solve the whole war problem.
Yeah, in
But
fact,
we
I
are
read
trying
that.
to make more nuclear power plants in Europe to get energy free from Russia. And
In fact, yeah, I read that
what's your
editorial.
comment on that?
Mhm.
It's always more.
That's all we need.
We
More.
just need more.
What were you saying, William? You read that piece in
Yes, I
Scientific
did.
American?
And I found it, also the way I don't have a background in the biology as much, but just from having to dabble in this, I found it interesting how he describes it in terms of the genetic trunk lines too, the bottom line, the bottleneck effect.
Right.
Like I guess during the younger Dryas period too, when a lot of species went extinct. And yeah, we're very narrow. And that alone, even if times were, even if we were in a post-scarcity society, that just makes us macrobiologically very vulnerable.
Right. We have what geneticists would call foundered. There's the founder effect when you have too little genetic variation in the global population. I think it'll be something else that causes our extinction, but it's just one more brick on the pile.
Mhm. I'm terribly concerned, and that's been I never thought I'd wake up to a time when, when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with nuclear war. I lived in Germany, and my dad used to be NATO military, and then he became a nuclear scientist. So I definitely recall Reagan's hot mic moment, we begin bombing in 5 minutes. And if you look at the situation now, we're so much closer to the doomsday clock for various reasons. I mean, they're extremely complex and it's extremely fluid. All the nuclear armed nation states are jockeying, and they have their own little vassal states. And yeah, I kind of have nostalgia, honestly, for the days of mutual assured destruction in the Cold War, what Carl Sagan referred to as the balance of terror. So that's what obsessed me when I was a teenager. And then in my 20s, I was obsessed with blue ocean event and climate collapse. And now, woo, double whammy.
Academics are always obsessed with one thing
Kevin,
or
you are
another.
muted.
I will not be surprised if a nuclear weapon is used surreptitiously to cool down the planet. It's the only instantaneous result that can happen that will start cooling the planet. I know that sounds completely fucking dystopian, but have a look around at the people who are running the world at the moment.
Yeah, but
You
it
mean
doesn't.
they will want to cool down the planet with nuclear weapons?
Yeah, nuclear winter.
Yeah. And but what will be the biological impact? I mean, you can cool down, but what will be the impact to other species on the planet? What will be the impact to soil, water, biodiversity?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be a very cold, dead planet.
And it will collapse food production, but so will heat. This is the Faustian bargain. This is where we've ended up, is that there is no way out, and we have psychopaths and sociopaths calling making all the decisions. None of these people make rational decisions. We all look at this and we go, oh, that can't happen. But you've got to understand the pathology of these people.
Yeah, well,
I mean, even though
US,
it's kind of a cutesified satire, but I think of Don't Look Up, when, hey, think of all the money we could make.
Yeah. Well, the United States is the only country that ever nuked civilians or anybody. And they did it twice for shits and giggles. They didn't have to do it either time. So this is, it's a psychopathic leadership here.
And there's a real balancing act here as well. Too much too many nuclear weapons means that the stratospheric ozone will be stripped away, as indicated in the movie Finch. And that will cause very rapid heating at the surface of the planet. Rapid sunburn, not as rapidly as demonstrated in the movie Finch. It'll be minutes rather than seconds, but artistic license, whatever. So there's a real balancing act here. How many nukes do we throw? None would be.
McPherson, can you explain a little bit environmental impact of the ongoing war and what's going to happen to environment, biodiversity, all species, including humans, if this war continues, and seems like it continues? What is the environmental impact?
Is that for me?
Yes, for start, the main ecological resource of ours.
I don't think there's any advantage. I don't see any advantage anywhere to use of nuclear weapons, whether it's biological diversity, increased ionizing radiation at the surface, stripping away stratospheric ozone. But here's a line from page 22 in the original issue of John Kenneth Galbraith's book, The Age of Uncertainty, published in 1977. People of privilege will always risk their complete destruction rather than surrender any material part of their advantage. That's where we are. The people of privilege that we're talking about today are people in high levels of government who are willing to risk their complete destruction, and ours too, rather than surrender any material part of their advantage. And we're in a zero-sum game when it comes to finite materials, such as fossil fuels. So it's no longer a case of smoke them if you got them. It's you got to smoke somebody else so that you can have them, whatever them is.
Dear Pauline, William, Kevin, are you also thinking about the environmental impacts of ongoing war? And probably it's going to be going this way, or maybe even worse.
Well, I think of the Southern Indian environmental justice movement, and they always point the finger, just like Greenpeace in Germany, that yes, militaries are the #1 driver of pollution, you know, even during peacetime, you know. Besides that, while the other Bill was talking, Guy, suddenly I had to think of Maz alone, you know, as an allegory, especially that lovely quote from John Kenneth Galbraith. And that's another thing we share in common, guys. I had that book. I don't know who I gave it to, but I remember, yeah.
Another thing to remember about military emissions is they're exempt from a country's emissions. So when nation states talk about this nonsense of net zero by whatever date in the future, all of it excludes military emissions. And I'll just give you a few statistics on the US military. This is from an article in The Conversation. Quote, in 2017, the US military bought 269,230 barrels of oil per day and emitted more than 25,000 kilotons of carbon dioxide by burning those fuels. The US Air Force purchased $4.9 billion worth of fuel. The Navy, $2.8 billion, followed by the Army at $947 million. The US military and the independent states' response to the threat it poses is grinding the living planet into dust. If the US military were a country, its fuel usage alone would make it the 47th largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, sitting between Peru and Portugal. That's where we are. All of that is being ignored.
Yeah. it's all black. It's externalized, as they say. You know, I've always found that so. Let's talk about psychopathic. You know, just in standard macroeconomic theory, when they talk about externalities and they use terms like Jevons paradox and the tragedy of the right, and it's all built into their utilitarian calculus, right?
I will turn back to, yes, Kim.
Let me add one more thing. One of the things that a lot of people forget about is that the weapons, the arms that they use have depleted uranium. Mm-hmm. So we're not just shooting and murdering people, we're also poisoning the land permanently.
And normally that's done to people of color in the Middle East or in Africa. Right. But let's not forget that NATO dropped depleted uranium on Serbia when they were bombing the fuck out of it.
Yeah.
I will turn back to Professor Guy McPherson. We discussed because earlier a lot about the climate prediction, where we are headed and when to expect, for instance, blue ocean event and when to expect loss of habitat. We discussed this a lot in our earlier interviews. Did you have any change of mind after this war started? Did you have different expectations about the timing of the upcoming climate events?
No. I mean, it's all bad and it will continue to get worse. And the worsening will continue to be increasingly obvious to everybody. So I'm sticking with the same prediction that I made a long time ago. I think we'll be very fortunate to get through 2026. But, you know, depending upon how you live your life, that can be a long time. It can feel like a long time, or it can feel like a very brief moment. And so I've been trying to encourage people to adopt the principles of modern stoicism and stop acting as if we as individuals have any influence over what happens at the global level or the level of a country or the level of the town outside of our small family, outside of our own household. I don't know, you know, as Homer wrote in the Iliad nearly 2,800 years ago, any moment might be your last. And sure enough, any moment might be your last, and it might be our last as well. I don't know. And so that's why I encourage people to live with urgency, and I've been doing that for a long time. And the response has been mixed, to be polite.
Why do people get crazy when you say live with urgency, be true to yourself, just show your best character, live your today best? You give these messages and everybody hates you.
Most people
lit himself on fire yet.
Right. I'm doing nothing. I'm accused every single day of doing nothing, of giving up. And as nearly as I can tell, there are very few people in the history of this planet who have sacrificed more than I have. I have given up a lot in exchange for no privileges.
I'll give you an example of Guy McPherson giving up. Since I met Guy McPherson, I've been volunteering at a not-for-profit native tree nursery on Rakino Island. In that time, I've planted 10,000 trees and got them out into the community. That wouldn't have happened if I hadn't met Guy. This man has motivated huge numbers of people to live in the present and get the fuck on with life. If you call that giving up and going to work and fucking signing petitions for Greenpeace, then whatever, I don't give a fuck. But I know for a fact that those 10,000 trees are a result of my friendship with Guy.
William, did you give up after hearing Guy McPherson for the first time, or?
No, au contraire. I think of Michael Dowd's, the stages of collapse awareness, and I got really pissed off in 2018, and I did I don't know if yeah, you probably saw that I circulated that email that I wrote about, I was inspired by Greta Thunberg, so I thought, why not start something like that here at Mississippi State University? And actually, surprisingly, we got a response. I mean, next year, but all it did was add to the carbon footprint. But it's a process, right? So Guy, when I began to, I discovered him actually in a conference it was called Global Futures, and you probably remember this. It was a panel discussion you had with Mark Maslin, and then there was this one idiot, sorry, ad hominem, but he was a physicist. Yeah, he's a physicist from the University of Washington, Pollock, and he just had this like bizarre kind of microcausal explanation, like, well, basically he was just denying warming because he said we don't understand the thermodynamics of water molecules well enough. It's like, it's like professional deformation, a la Jean-Paul Sartre. But I remember, that really, that was a kind of like I almost felt like, faith healers at the TV. I wanted to touch the screen when I saw you and talking with several others. And it really galvanized my class too. So no, I just moved into the anger stage, and now I guess I'm at about 4 or 5 realistically, kind of in terms of acceptance. I don't think I'm at the level of Karen Perry. I don't, and she really did the, the activism, but certainly it ushered me along and put fire under my ass. And yeah, it was. That was
the Real Truth About Health conference.
That's it, right?
And the guy who did that puts that on every year, and he asked me to be one of the speakers. He paid all my expenses. He was great. I got there as soon as he realized I was in the hotel that he paid for, which was awesome. He tracked me down, and for the next 2 hours, he tried to convince me to not talk about what he asked me to talk about, because he realized this is really bad news and he doesn't want to hear it. Yeah. And every year since then, it's in, I don't know, 6 or 8 years, he invites people and he asks them specifically, what do you think about Guy McPherson's prediction?
Well,
and of course, all of them do what James Hansen did when he was asked. I think it's crazy, he said. So I'm crazy.
Guy, I think it was Arthur Schopenhauer who said it best. And of course, we're not going to be around to see stage 3, or at least not the way things are now. But, Arthur Schopenhauer said there are 3 stages, when facts become accepted. The first stage is ridicule. The second stage is denial. And then the third stage is where everybody's like, yeah, isn't that obvious? What's your,
right.
And that's usually after it's too late. Right. I mean, we see this in science. We see it, right? It's, yeah.
Yep.
I will turn back to war topic. There's also another site in Russia, and there are researchers who have been publishing. Some of them are doing good research. For instance, Natalia Shakova and her partner, they've been publishing a lot of good information about the Arctic methane. And there are good researchers in Russia. I mean, they didn't choose the war, they didn't want the war. But right now we hear that Russian scientists are censored. They cannot publish their work anymore. They cannot reach the social media to give messages. And they are trying to discourage Russia to stop the war by doing that. But also Natalia Shakova has nothing to do with the war. So our also scientific knowledge is just having a damage with this. And well, on the other hand, I don't know how much people really cared about the papers that they published, even though they were extremely important. I didn't see IPCC citing about the research that she did. So what do you see the other side, which is censored? Dear Guy, I start from you again as our head scientist, and I turn back to everyone.
Well, Shikova's entire research team, including her partner, Igor Semeletov, were the subject of a defamation campaign organized by Gavin Schmidt, who took over James Hansen's position at NASA, and others. Can't remember the guy's name at the University of Chicago. And I saw a video that Nick Breeze is a relatively well-known climate videographer. He goes to all the COPs and so on.
Yeah.
He hosted me at his home when I did my tour of Western Europe in 2015, late 2015, September, October 2015. And so he showed me a video that he shot with
Natalia
Shikova,
Yeah.
that he couldn't release because she made some statements in there that would have the United States security surveillance system chase her down. But as nearly as I can tell, they were true. She was just pointing out that in their research, not her research, but in their research, they were tracking down evidence and they were presenting that evidence. And as a consequence, she was defamed terribly by people who certainly know better. And it's becoming increasingly obvious now that their work on methane was well ahead of its time. And everybody now is catching up and realizing that 750 parts per billion methane in the atmosphere in 1750, those are the good old days, and we're not going back there anymore. And we're more than double that at this point, and there's no going back. So people are starting to get on board with the research of Semeletov and Shikova and their entire research team. And they've been right all along. Because the funny thing about evidence is when you follow this thing called the scientific method and report the results truthfully and clearly, it's really hard to go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so at some point, everybody's got to realize, oh yeah, it seems like it's right. And, you know, they first presented their information at the European Geophysical Union meeting in late 2008. So it's been a long time that they've been presenting this information. That's when she's reported, representing her research team, that they expected a 50 gigaton burst of methane to occur at any time based on their research on the East Siberian Arctic shelf. And it still can happen anytime. There's all kinds of evidence subsequently published indicating that the system there is ripe for that kind of burst, and it has happened in the prehistorical past. So it shouldn't be a great big surprise to anybody. I think it's horrible what has happened to her and her research team, but I think it's pretty terrible what happened to me too. So far be it for me to complain about it.
And you know, I have a background mostly in mathematical modeling, and when you look at tipping points, and that's something that, you know, oftentimes gets, you know, swept under the rug, is that when you look at a nonlinear dynamical system, its trajectories in phase space are path dependent. So these are irreversible trends, and obviously the ice core drillings reveal that, and it's all about rates, not states, and history. You know, the evolution of dynamical systems are path dependent, and that's what makes, that's why the irreversibility is baked into it. And sometimes you see these harebrained schemes where, oh, we can just kind of like tweak this and leverage this dynamical parameter, and then we can revert. No, you can't. These trajectories in phase space are path dependent. That's one of the first articles of faith you learn in dynamical systems theory. And yeah, you know, the evidence is, what did Emily Dickinson say? Experiment escorts us last. Its pungent aroma allows no axiom and opportunity.
You know, even the IPCC, one of the more conservative bodies in the history of the planet from a scientific perspective, they concluded in their October 8th, 2018 report, global warming of 1.5 degrees, that climate change was abrupt. In fact, here's a direct quote. These global level rates of human-driven change far exceed the rates of change driven by geophysical or biosphere forces that have altered the Earth system trajectory in the past. Even abrupt geophysical events do not approach current rates of human-driven change, end quote. So that's 2018. Then in 2019, September 24th, 2019, in the IPCC Special Report on the Ocean and Cryosphere in a Changing Climate, the IPCC indicated that an overheated ocean is responsible for irreversible climate change. So we've got one of the more scientific bodies in the history of the planet claiming that climate change is abrupt and irreversible, and it never makes the news. And that's been 3 and 4 years ago, and it never makes the news. It's almost as if there's something going on with corporate media. They really don't want you to know what's going on in the world because it might hamper your willingness to spend money.
All right.
But it's not just the news. The large NGOs won't admit that.
Yeah.
You won't hear Greenpeace quote that. You won't hear 350.org quote that. It's not, that doesn't suit their corporate model of fundraising.
Yes, you're right. Because if the situation is beyond our ability to fix, then who's going to pay to fix it?
It's a predicament, not a problem. And I was thinking also what Kevin and Pauline and well, I guess all of you were bringing up, thanks to the questions that Beril was asking too. And for me, what I find so, we're all voices in the wilderness, and this is like an oasis that we're. And what I find so liberating too is I think of Arnie Nass's epochal paper about coming out of the closet, basically, right? When he talks about the difference between a deep and a shallow approach. And the shallow approach is basically taking that blue pill. And even though probably 90%, I mean, there may be that 10% who suffer real cognitive dissonance and try to hold two, but I think 90% just toe the line because they're all these, the normalcy bias, right? We can talk about implicit biases, but also the pressures. So just essentially being able to just speak your truth. I mean, as simplistic, but as important as that is. And it really moved me what Kevin was saying too about how your friendship with Guy. I mean, I was thinking about that in terms of like the Bodhisattva, compassionate action. I mean, that's what else is there, right?
I first read about Natalia Shakova after reading a paper from Guy McPherson. He was citing Natalia's work there, and that's how I reached to her papers. And it was late evening here, a few years ago. I was sitting here alone. I first followed Guy McPherson's reference, then I found Natalia Shakova's paper, and I read the gigatons of methane anytime can burst out. It was night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I was mainly not scared, but I had a big surprise. Why nobody thought about that? I'm in science for more than 2 decades. I'm working on satellite images. I'm working on Earth observation. I've been collaborating with scientists looking at sea ice and permafrost. We are looking at Earth data all day, every day. Why nobody told me about that? I couldn't sleep. Asking why, making more Google search. Is this really real? It is real, but why? It is too hard to talk about it. Why it is too hard to accept this?
It's like the blue pill instead of the red crisis.
Pill. What's that, Kevin?
It's an existential crisis. Our culture can't and cannot and won't confront existential crises.
Right.
Yeah, you got to take that blue pill,
What I think it's a very complicated situation that the leaders of the world recognize is happening.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do about it. There isn't anything to do about it. We've heard some specific leaders actually use those words where there's nothing we can do about it. I think Trump said that.
Yeah.
And
People didn't appreciate that, by the way.
no. You know, even a stopped watch is right twice a day. So I think that it's not so much that if they tell people they're afraid that they're going to go crazy and loot stores and go nuts, but you know, they have been following Guy's work. The government has been following Guy's work for a long time. And they've seen what the people who hear his words and embrace them do. And what do? Do we start looting and go nuts and just go on these insane sprees or go kill ourselves? No, we don't do that. We live our lives. We do things that we love. We don't necessarily go to marches anymore, since we know that that's kind of pointless. They're fun. They're a great way to meet interesting, cool people, especially if they're all marching for something that you believe in. But it's different. And so I think that they realize that if people know they're going to quit their jobs, they're going to stop working at the factory, and they're going to go get a boat and go for a cruise and stop making the crap that makes them money. You know, Elon Musk said we need more babies. He says we need more people in the world. You know, basically he needs more work.
Consumers.
He wants more consumers to make his crap and sell his crap.
I want to go back to something that Beril said a little while ago, talking about why isn't this truly being talked about in public, you know, the scientific reality of where we're at. But I think the biggest secret or cover up is the aerosol masking effect.
Yeah. Global dimming paradox.
Yeah.
James E. Henson called it our Faustian bargain.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there's almost as much warming masked as we know of. So, you know, in a collapse of industrial civilization, we could get a doubling of warming in a month or two.
Yeah.
That's how
Right.
precarious our situation has become.
Yeah, Hansen says it takes 5 days for those aerosols to fall out of the atmosphere.
And
5 days.
in an interview, he said, if we cut emissions, it'll get warm for a little while, but then it'll taper off. And I'm wondering, like, does he have like a really long, godlike lifespan? Does he think he's going to live 15,000 years? Because that's how long it's going to be hot for. By the end of those 15,000 years, everything's going to be cooked.
Yeah, there's a paper February 27th, 2012 in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States, indicating that the heating associated with the current level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere persists for at least 1,000 years. So the current level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, that level of heating, after it catches up with the 10-year or so lag, will persist for at least 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So James Hansen, it's not just going to warm up for 20 minutes and then we're back to the party again. That's insane.
Yeah, it's backloading.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think Beril's done some great work in this space where she's talked about a BOE, a blue ocean event in the Arctic. The IPCC talk about we could have one and then not have one the next year. This is bullshit.
Occasionally, I spray. How can it be?
Well, We wouldn't have one next year if we had a nuclear war and dropped a few nukes on active volcanoes, but yeah. But
we lose Arctic, but next year comes back. That's what IPCC writes. Occasionally, I spray.
Are they taking drugs?
Laugh at this.
Are they stoned?
All of them?
no,
Dear Guy McPherson, some closing words. I will make it turn to everyone. Some closing words, please. Amor fati.
Every day, every single day, people send me new articles indicating that there's no way out of this monkey trap that we've created for ourselves. There's no way out. So people send me this information every day. In fact, at least 20 times today, I have responded to an email message with, I already saw this, thanks. So that's how I spend most of my day, is in that manner. But that's a relatively few people who are sending those messages, obviously. So there's, you know, I get those messages from maybe 50 people every single day, the same people. And so those people understand where we're at. They understand very well, because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we're in the midst of abrupt, irreversible climate change. And what does that mean? That means that, as Homer wrote a long time ago, any moment might be your last. That's what that means. And so live your life accordingly. Don't live it like Michael Mann tells you to live it. Oh, sorry. A little rant.
Pauline, some closing words, please.
Well, yes, the Amor Fati is a good one. I have a different twist on it. Love your fatty.
Are you talking about weed?
Do what you love. Be with those you love. Honor the time that you have left with them. It's
William,
precious.
some closing words, please.
Oh, the other bill. Pauline mentioned that fatalistic statement that Trump made, and I recall that so well. I read that article right when I saw the panel discussion with Guy. And for me, the most poignant tragedy about all of this is that we are scandalized by the particular. You know, we are embodied, and so our intelligence is local. And yet, on a certain very fundamental level, our intelligence is also non-local, and so we grasp. It's almost like feeling omniscient and impotent at the same time. You know, and honestly, I don't see any solution to that. You can't think your way out of it. So it's just doing what we're doing, is what Kevin said earlier, you know, the fierce grace of just planting one tree at a time.
Dear Kevin, some final closing words, please.
Don't spend your last moments doom scrolling. I know it is addictive. I know we all want to stay on top of it. And the changes are happening so quickly. I admit I do this all the time. I spend way too much time keeping up with the great unraveling. But what I'd like people to do after they stop listening or finish listening to this is to go outside and savor the moment, enjoy nature. The more in danger we know it is, the more we appreciate it. Go out there and make the most of it. Pay homage to the planet that has given us the opportunity to have these moments and have these conversations. Plant a tree, folks. I find it incredibly therapeutic.
Amen.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I'm
Pauline,
one of the, yes.
Pauline and I took a walk through the woods today to the nearby lake with just that in mind. And I try to do that every day. My phone tells me to do that every day, but unfortunately it hasn't happened frequently enough. That's wonderful advice, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the luckiest persons lived on the planet. having this team together with me. Thank you so much for your precious time. And thank you so much for the time of the audience who is watching this, caring about these wonderful words. I wish they spread these loving messages with those who they care.
Thank you.
I love you so much, all of you. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Beril.